All right, so this week's deep dive is all about taking control of our finances, something I think we all want to do. Get a better grip on things. You sent over some interesting podcast snippets on money management. So much good stuff in there. Let's unpack those insights together. One of the things that really stood out from what you've been listening to is how important budgeting is.
Yeah, it really is the foundation.
But it's one thing to know we should budget, right? Actually doing it consistently, that's a whole other story. What's your take on why budgeting seems to be, I don't know, like this cornerstone of so much financial advice?
Well, I think for a lot of people, budgeting feels restrictive, you know, but it shouldn't be about that at all. It's really about awareness and making choices you feel good about. When you budget, you're basically shining a light on your spending habits, understanding where your money's actually going.
Instead of it just disappearing into the void.
Exactly. And then you can make conscious decisions about how to direct it towards the things that truly matter to you.
So instead of driving around aimlessly hoping we reach our destination, budgeting's like having a roadmap.
Love that analogy. And the best part is there's no right or wrong way to do it.
True. You shared a couple of podcasts that mentioned the 50-30-20 method, which seems pretty user-friendly.
Yeah, it's a great starting point. Essentially, you're dividing your after-tax income into 3 buckets. 50% goes to your needs.
Rent, groceries, bills, the essentials.
Exactly. 30% is allocated for wants, the fun stuff.
Okay, that makes sense. And then 20% is for savings and tackling any debt. Simple in theory, but I imagine in practice it takes a bit of fine-tuning, right? Figuring out what falls into each category for you and then maybe adjusting those percentages.
For sure. It's not set in stone. It's about figuring out what works best for your situation. For example, if you're carrying a lot of debt right now, you might want to bump up that debt repayment percentage. Maybe rein in the wants category a little bit until you make some headway.
Makes sense. Now, the podcast you shared also talked about different methods for paying off debt. The snowball and the avalanche methods, right?
You got it.
I've heard those terms thrown around, but to be honest, I'm not entirely sure I could explain the difference. Could you break those down for us?
Absolutely. So imagine you've got multiple debts. Could be anything, student loans, credit card balances, a car payment, whatever.
A familiar scenario for many.
Right. So with the debt snowball, you focus on paying off your smallest debt first, regardless of the interest rate.
Okay, interesting.
You'll still make the minimum payments on all your other debts, but you really put any extra money you have towards that smallest debt.
So you can knock it out quickly.
Exactly. The idea is that seeing those small wins early on can be super motivating and help you stay on track. Then once that smallest debt is gone, you take the money you were putting toward it and roll it into the next smallest debt, and so on.
I love that. Those small wins can be such a game changer for building momentum.
Absolutely. Now, the debt avalanche method is a bit different.
How so?
With this one, you prioritize the debt with the highest interest rate, regardless of its size. So you might not see those initial wins as quickly, but you'll end up saving more money on interest in the long run.
Okay, so it's more strategic in that sense.
Exactly. It's like tackling the biggest, baddest debt monster first.
I love it. Snowball for motivation, avalanche for long-term savings. Love that. And speaking of feeling financially secure, the podcasts really emphasized having an emergency fund.
So important.
They even said you don't need to suddenly have thousands of dollars stashed away. It's more about starting small and building that safety net gradually. Why is having this emergency fund so crucial, and how can someone realistically build one if they're not exactly, rolling in extra cash?
Think of an emergency fund as your financial safety net. It's there to catch you if something unexpected happens. It could be anything. Your car breaks down, you have an unexpected medical bill, you lose your job, life throws curveballs.
All very real possibilities, unfortunately.
And without an emergency fund, those situations can really derail your finances. You might end up relying on credit cards or loans, which can just dig you deeper into a hole. But even a small emergency fund, it can make a world of difference. I mean, imagine your car needs a repair. Say it's going to be $800.
Ouch.
Yeah, it's a pain, but it happens. Now, if you've got that money set aside, you can handle it no problem. You don't have to stress about how to pay your rent or dip into savings you're building for something else.
Right. Like you said, it's about that peace of mind as much as it is the actual money. And you mentioned starting small, which I think can feel way less intimidating.
Totally. You don't need to have a ton of money to just appear out of thin air.
Yeah.
Even if you can only swing $20 a week or even $50 a week, hey, that's a start. That's still moving in the right direction.
Absolutely.
And you might be surprised how quickly it adds up.
Yeah, just cutting back on a few things here and there can make a difference. Like Maybe skipping takeout once a week.
Exactly.
Or putting a pause on that streaming service you haven't actually watched in months.
Those small but consistent contributions, that's the key.
It's about forming those good habits, right? Proving to yourself that you can prioritize your finances, even in small ways. And speaking of building for the future, those podcasts you shared, they also got into investing, which, let's be honest, can feel pretty daunting for a lot of people.
It definitely can be intimidating. There's so much to learn. It can feel overwhelming.
Totally.
But one thing those podcasts really emphasized was the benefit of starting early, even if it's just with a small amount. And that's thanks to the power of compound interest.
Okay, confession time. Compound interest. It's always sounded kind of like a magical money spell to me. Could you demystify it a bit? How does it work?
It's actually pretty straightforward when you break it down. Basically, compound interest is interest you earn on your interest.
Okay.
So let's say you invest $100 and it earns 5% interest in a year. You're now up to $105.
Right.
Now, the next time that interest is calculated, it's not just on your original $100, it's on that $105.
I see. So the growth compounds over time.
Exactly. It's like a snowball effect.
Yeah.
And the longer you let that snowball roll, the bigger it gets.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's why starting early, even with small amounts, can make a huge difference over the long run.
That makes a lot of sense, but I can totally understand why someone new to all this might still feel overwhelmed even with that knowledge.
Oh, absolutely. It can be a lot to take in. But hey, those podcasts you shared, they've probably got other episodes that go deeper into investing basics.
Yeah, good point. That could be a good next step for our listeners. We'll be sure to link those in the show notes.
And listen, if you're feeling really lost, it's always a good idea to talk to a financial advisor. A good advisor can help you put together a plan that aligns with your goals and your risk tolerance.
That's great advice. So we've got our budget sorted, we're building up our emergency fund, we're even starting to think about investing. But those podcasts you shared also mentioned something that honestly sounded almost too good to be true. Automating your finances. What is that all about?
Well, it's definitely not too good to be true. It's more like, using technology to your advantage.
So instead of having to remember a million things and do everything manually, we can put some of it on autopilot.
Exactly.
Right.
Why make things harder than they need to be?
Right. So what does that look like in practice?
Well, let's say you're trying to build up that emergency fund we were talking about.
Yeah.
You could set up an automatic transfer every time you get paid. So a portion of your paycheck goes straight into your savings account before you even have a chance to spend it.
I love that idea. Out of sight, out of mind, right?
Exactly. You can also automate bill payments, which is a lifesaver. No more late fees, no more wait, did I pay that moments?
Been there.
And there are even apps now that'll analyze your spending, categorize your transactions, even help you stick to your budget, like having a personal finance assistant in your pocket.
Okay, that's seriously impressive. I can see how taking the mental load off all that could free up some serious brain space for other things. So to recap, we've covered budgeting, debt, emergency funds, even dipping our toes into investing and the world of automation. That's a lot. What would you say are the most important things for our listeners to keep in mind as they're, navigating their own financial journeys?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that financial well-being, it's a journey, not a destination. And just like any journey, you got to know where you want to go. Right?
Have that destination in mind.
Exactly. So what are your financial goals, short-term and long-term? Once you've got that clarity, you can start using all these tools and strategies we've been talking about to actually get there.
Love that. It's like having that financial roadmap to guide you.
Precisely. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about progress.
Progress over perfection. I like that. So for our listener who's ready to take action, what's one small, tangible step they could take today based on what we've discussed?
I love this question. Okay, here's a challenge. Grab your phone, open up your notes app, or just grab a pen and paper. Jot down your top 3 financial goals, but make them specific. Okay, so instead of save more money, think build a $1,000 emergency fund in the next 3 months, or research budgeting apps this weekend. See the difference?
Huge difference. When you make it concrete like that, it feels way more actionable.
Exactly.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. I feel like we've covered so much ground. From budgeting basics to the magic of compound interest, even explored the power of automation. A huge thank you to you for breaking all this down and sharing your expertise.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk about this stuff.
And to our listeners, remember, taking control of your finances doesn't have to be scary or overwhelming. Start small, be consistent, and never underestimate the power of knowledge and a little bit of automation. Until next time, happy diving.